Hello, everyone, and welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. I hope you're all doing well today. So, what's going on around the world? I tell you, I love this show. I really do because, every week it's something different, something unique, something crazy, I guess. So, let's kind of go through a couple little topics here, and then we'll take a break as we always do, and then we'll be joined by the distinguished Senator Ben Murray Bruce, who's always a lot of fun to chat with. So, where do we begin? Donald Trump. We have to talk about Donald Trump. Always do. We'll talk about him more, and we'll talk about the great Nigerian Nostradamus, Ben Murray Bruce, and about his predictions about who would win the elections. Listen, a lot to talk about. I mean, there's usually this transition period in the United States. We have one president at the time rule, and I tell you, Donald Trump is shaking things up before he even takes office. So definitely some complications between him and President Biden. We'll talk about. We have to talk about the ceasefire in Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel and what that actually means for the region. And then we have to talk about, listen, there's a really something crazy happening in Romania, of all places. People don't think about Romania, but they expected that the pro-West government would be a shoe-in to win. However, what's happening is that this guy kind of out of left field, what we talk about as far as an analogy in the United States, who's pro-Russia, anti-West, is in the runoff. So I tell you, could be a real shakeup in Romania, which is a very strong, traditionally has been a very strong NATO ally, European ally. So we'll have to follow that to see what happens. And I just got back from New Zealand. I tell you, I went to the far reaches of the world, far reaches. I tell you, it's just, for all of you who want to go to New Zealand, I would just stress, hey, just make sure you pack a little teddy bear to cuddle with as you go, because it's a very, very, very long flight. But once you get there, I mean, one thing that the indigenous population, what's interesting happening in New Zealand is that the Maori, who is the indigenous population, they're rising up. I mean, they're trying to take their country back. And so you see a movement there. You saw a movement in Australia about the Aborigines. You see some movements of the Inuits in Canada. So I do believe one of my predictions, I'll try to be my own Nostradamus here, is that over the coming years, we're going to see a lot of the indigenous population rising up, and we'll see how that fits into the whole scenario and what's going on around the world. Anyway, a lot to talk about. I'm glad you're all here. Distinguished, who's going to be in the studio, at least I believe. There he is. Look at there. I speak your name and you arrive.
How you doing?
Pretty good. Well, you're all dressed up. What's this red tie going on here?
Well, I'm doing this for you. Plus, I got to give a speech at 10 o'clock for the movie industry, so I'm dressed up for that.
Okay. Well, you dressed up for that. Well, listen, I'm sure it'll be a masterful speech. No doubt about it. So, listen, it's always great to see you. It really is.
Thank you.
So, let's get started. I mean, I'm going to call you, I'm not going to call you Ben anymore. I'm going to call you Nostradamus, because you, Mr. Nostradamus, listen, I like to pride myself that I'm a political guru, but what do I know? 2 times now I predicted Donald Trump would lose, and he won. So, you predicted correctly that he would win, and so I'm going to put you on the spot. So, tell the world, how did you know he was going to win?
Well, first of all, I spoke to people in Middle America, and what they said to me way before Donald Trump was a candidate, they said, one, they would never vote for a woman, black or white. 2, I felt the Republican Party was becoming a mainstream party, caring for the working class and the masses. 3, I felt the Republican Party reflected the conservative views of mainstream America, which was once held by the Democratic Party. And lastly, the non-stop prosecution of Donald Trump made him a hero. Everybody who supported him dug down and felt he was unjustly prosecuted. You add all of this together, it was clear that Donald Trump would be the next president of America.
Well, I have to hand it to you because you're right about that. I mean, the analysis of the election afterwards. Well, first of all, let's be very clear about this. People talk about it being a landslide election. I mean, Kamala Harris, the vice president, she got 48% and he got 51%. So it wasn't a landslide electorally, I mean, from that standpoint, but electorally, as you know, our electoral college, it was a landslide. But, America's clearly divided. I mean, as like you, I mean, I talk to people in middle America. They're clearly very strong opinions for Donald Trump. And I think that's, one of the reasons he won. I agree with you because the support for the Democrats and the values of the Democrats, it was not as hard, not as solid. And so definitely, I think that led to it. But so let's just talk about what you think is going to happen over the next 60 days. On January 20th, for the viewers, on January 20th is the inauguration day for the President of the United States. And one thing interesting, I'll tell you this, here in the UK, as you know, Ben, that when the Prime Minister changes, like 24 hours, you have new ministers, you have everybody taking office, and it's just like within 24 hours. In the United States, we have this 2 months where we have to supposedly vet, our cabinet, our secretaries. But what do you think, from what you're seeing, what do you think the first months of a Trump presidency are going to be like?
It'll be a tsunami. I think I think America is a lot more conservative than people think it is. And I think there's a revolution going on in America. I think most people want to go back to traditional family values. And I think that's what President Trump is trying to do. How long it'll last, I don't know. The gender issue, the issue with China, Russia, I think is going to be a tsunami. I think, one, he would try to end the war in Ukraine. He would try to end the war with Israel and Hezbollah and Hamas. He would have a foreign policy and a domestic, first of all, those are foreign policy, and from trade, China, tariffs on China, Canada, from what he has said already. He will have, and I think he's already announced, a very unorthodox cabinet. He's a revolutionary, and I think he will do whatever it takes to let people know how crazy and unorthodox he is, shake up the system, and forever be remembered as the most unorthodox president in the history of the United States of America.
Okay, well, do you think that it's important to shake up America? I mean, do you think America had become too kind of set in its ways, and it's time for it to be, shooken up?
I think the liberals, take California, it's, some part of America has become too liberal. And I think the religious group and the right will want to shake up America. And I think it's time to shake up America. I agree with that. It needs to be shaken up.
Well, let's talk about foreign policy, and then we're going to come back to some domestic issues in this cabinet. Well, first, what does this mean, do you think, for like Africa and Nigeria? I mean, with the Trump presidency.
Well, first of all, I think the Republicans are better for Africa than the Democrats. Historically, the Democrats have done nothing for Africa. And I think since Trump is a businessman and he likes trade, we don't want aid. I think it'll be great for us. I think it'll be great for us. We'd like to do some trade deals, Africa and the United States of America, on the basis of equity. I think, I really believe it would be. Specifically, I don't know, because I have no idea what his African agenda is. I don't know who his Undersecretary of State for Africa would be. I do not know if he has an African policy. I think he ought to. If he does, and we embark on trade and manufacturing, if we can sell our goods Africans can sell their goods in America at favorable rates, I think that would be great for us. Africa needs to be a manufacturing economy. We can't just sell raw materials to the rest of the world. That has to stop. And maybe his presidency would create the environment where we can have a fair trade deal with the United States. So maybe some American companies can finally come to Africa and set up base, and we can do business. In Africa, it's a contest between China and the United States and Europe versus the United States and Europe. Maybe for the first time he'll pay attention to Africa, because right now we're being dominated by Asia. I don't know if that's good, but they're the ones invested in Africa right now. Maybe the United States should now pay attention to Africa. with 1.2, I don't know, 1.2 billion people. It's Africa as a continent. It's a great economy, and I think we can do a deal with America, and I think it'd be beneficial for both countries, continent and country.
You know, one thing I'll tell you this, you know, one picture I want on my desk? I wanted a picture of Ben Murray Bruce as president of Nigeria and President Donald Trump standing together in the Oval Office on my desk. That's what I want.
Your wish may come true. That could make me run. Yeah, you're right.
It would be, listen, I think it would be, you know, listen, listen, all craziness aside, I mean, one of the reasons I like to have you on the show is because you have a perspective that it's a very balanced perspective, I'll say that. But let's talk about China and China's investment and what's happening. You know, a lot of people now are saying, yes, China's investing in Africa, China's investing in South America and certain countries. But, you know, in the United States, there's this big issue about what they call predatory lending, where people in very poor neighborhoods would go to the local pawn shop or the local loan place and they would get loans for like 30 and 40%, you know, just it's the only place they could get a loan. And people are equating that's what China's doing to certain places in Africa. It's predatory lending. They're loaning the money, knowing that that it'll never be paid back, just so they can control the country for their own political gains. And I see that happening a lot in West Africa. I mean, does that concern you about Nigeria? Does it concern you about, you know, China's investment in Nigeria, or do you think that that's, you know, just the cost of doing business?
No, it's not a cost of doing business, but it's a Western playbook. What China is doing is what the West has done for Africa. Historically, the West, they colonized African countries. They took advantage of our assets. The French West Africa, look what they've done, paid for reparations and all kinds of stuff for the investments they made. The British, Americans never colonized anybody because you were a colony yourself. But if you look at what is happening in the world, it's as if it's a relay. The West dominated Africa for a couple of 100 years. Then they lost interest. And then China took the baton and they're taking over from the West. But it's a different kind of, it's an economic colonial policy of China versus a policy of the West that enslaved us. So it's just a change of the baton. Now, the reason they can do it is because there's a vacuum. The West left a vacuum in Africa. If that vacuum is not filled, somebody will fill the vacuum. Water finds its level. Now, if the West wants to participate in the growth and the phenomenal wealth in Africa, then they must participate in a manner that shows justice and equity, where Africa and the West can have something to look forward to. If they don't, then it's an open field for China. So the West has to decide. This Africa will one day become a Chinese colony. That is a reality, because we don't have the resources to fight back. We need investment. So predatory lending, as you rightly said, is correct. But the point is, do we have one superpower, or do we have two superpowers, or have three superpowers? I mean, China, Russia, and the United States of America. America must decide if they want an African policy. If they want an African policy, then they should, America is always talking about justice and equity and all that kind of stuff. They need to practice what they preach. If America practice what they preach, Africa is available. But if all America does is make nuclear bombs and F-16 or F-18 jet fighters and go into space and forget about 1.4 billion people, then this will be a Chinese colony. So the choice is yours.
No, I 100% agree. I mean, America has been an absentee landlord around the world. I mean, and as an example, I mean, we haven't talked about India and Modi, but in Guyana, in South America, there's a country of 680,000 people. Modi has been, I mean, I know the president down there, Irfan Ali, and we were talking the other day, because Modi spent 3 days, 3 full days, the head of India, the prime minister of India, spent 3 days in Guyana, a country of 600-something thousand people, just to show his love and respect, and planting trees and doing all this kind of stuff. Imagine if the president of the United States actually took time to go around the world and do stuff like that. You know, we would be much better off. But listen, between China, India, Russia, Iran, even South Africa to some degree, Brazil, you're right. America is falling on the wayside. So listen, we have to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll talk about Ukraine and oh, go ahead.
President Trump now has a Nigerian relative, so maybe his views will change. Maybe his daughter's husband, who lives around the corner here, could make him change his views about Nigeria. He can come and do a couple of deals here. Tell President Trump we have lots of oil, we have diamond, we have gold, we have aquamarine, we have cocoa. He can come and do a deal here. We'll host him for a couple of days, and that'll be good.
Well, listen, I'll make sure I pass it on. We'll talk about that right after the break. But let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with Senator Ben Murray-Bruce.
Ukraine is the front line of the global fight against authoritarianism. They are fighting for all of us, for global freedom and democracy. But the war won't be won just on the battlefield. We must support the children, the parents, the wives, the medical professionals, the POWs, the local and regional governments, and the soldiers who have all suffered from the evil of authoritarianism. Humanity for Freedom Foundation is actively working in Ukraine to help win this war on all fronts. Supporting local and regional governments all around Ukraine. Supporting the children of IDPs, POWs, and those on the front lines. Bye-bye. Supporting those who change the lives of Ukrainians every day. Supporting the families of POWs and those missing in action. Supporting regional and military hospitals with specialized equipment for those who have suffered from the war. Supporting families to reintegrate into society. None of this can be done without our partners all across Ukraine, and especially organizations like the Humanitarian Hub.
What we do globally is that we try to support those that are on the front lines in fighting against authoritarianism. But our organization and me personally strongly believe that the front lines for this fight for global freedom and democracy and fighting authoritarianism is here on the front lines in Ukraine.
By uniting together, we can win this war. Ukraine's victory is the world's victory.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters, and we're honored to be joined by Senator, a distinguished, I don't even know what to call you anymore, Nostradamus Ben Murray-Bruce, NBMB. That's what we're going to call you, NBMB, Nostradamus. What?
Plain Ben is just fine.
Plain Ben. Oh, that's your campaign slogan. Plain Ben.
Plain
yeah,
Ben.
I kind of like
That's
it.
right.
We should put that on the side of the buses, you know. No, listen. We just, we just showed the little snippet of my recent trip to Ukraine, and I want to talk about that because it actually ties into your final statement there about what with Donald Trump and about Nigeria opportunities. So I think one of the, I think the foreign policy doctrine of the Trump presidency is based on economic opportunity more so than what I would call democracy and freedom doctrine. I mean, as you know, America traditionally has been where we go where, we need to protect the underdog or to protect freedom and democracy. But I do think that there's a great opportunity for Nigeria with the Trump presidency because I think that he and his family and those around him will be looking at where are the greatest financial opportunities, not just for America, but for other people as well. And Nigeria represents one of those opportunities. So I think that that's why what you're talking about, I think you'll probably see Donald Trump taking a more active role in West Africa, in countries like Nigeria. And with that said, let's just take that and talk about Ukraine. We talk about how, he talks about how he's going to end the war in a day. I think one of the reasons he wants the war to end, it's not because anything to do with freedom or democracy is because he sees Russia as a great economic powerhouse where there are a lot of opportunities. And it's much better that Russia be a free and open society, not burdened by war. So, okay, I'm going to ask you your prediction. What do you think? How is the war going to end in Ukraine?
I think he's going to cut a deal. They got to figure out where is a land situation, how much land he leaves for Soviet Union. That's the bottom line. How much territory the Soviet Union will take over, and that's it. And I think Trump is not interested in spending billions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' money making bombs that he can send to Ukraine to fight a war that is unwinnable. Russia can't win, Ukraine can't win, there's a stalemate. Some parts of Ukraine are Russian speaking. Leave those parts for Russia, cut a deal, end the war, and end that misery. The same for Israel. If I was him, I'd do the same. Fighting a war. Look, you have a nuclear option. An option nobody can or will use. So the fastest way to end the war militarily is the nuclear option. Nobody's going to use the nuclear bomb. And because nobody's going to use the nuclear bomb, innocent people are going to die, buildings are going to be destroyed. So he's right. End the war, make a deal, and move on in life. You can't win all the time. You cut your losses and move on. I don't think it's a winnable law. I think the mistake the West made was trying to get Ukraine to become a member of NATO. You should leave Russia alone sometimes, and let's move on with our lives. So in a sense, Trump is right. End the war and end the misery. A lot of poor people in America that need that money, a lot of homeless people in America, use some of that money to take care of the homeless people in America, and then create trade with Russia, have trade with China, and move on with life. We're not going to spend the rest of our lives fighting a war nobody can win. So yeah, he's right.
Well, but okay, well, where do you draw the line about territorial integrity? I mean, listen, you're a landowner, right? How would you feel if your neighbor came into your backyard and took half your backyard and just stayed there until you finally relented and said, I'm just going to keep it? I mean, isn't that an issue if we just allow bullies or other people just to take land and territory?
You are logical, you are right, but unfortunately, what are the options? You are right. You are absolutely right. But what are the options? Putin is not going to give up. The only other alternative is you overthrow Putin and get rid of him and assassinate him and find somebody else in Russia who you got to deal with. But now you're dealing with the pride of Russia. So I don't know how this is going to work. The biggest problem any nation has is for a country to have the bomb. Once you have the bomb, then how do you negotiate? Can you negotiate with, if North Korea took a part of Malaysia, for instance, what are you going to do? Have a nuclear fight over a part of Malaysia? The chances are you cut a deal. You don't have a choice.
No, listen, I agree from a practical standpoint. You're right. I mean, it's like one of those frustrating things. First of all, I don't like to talk about in hindsight, but I will say that we should never have been in this place to begin with. I mean, I think, President Obama, who, I have respect for in certain fronts, I mean, really screwed up when he just allowed Russia to take Crimea. He set the precedent that, hey, basically, Russia, do whatever you want to do, and, there's not going to be a price to pay. So, a lot of these conflicts around the world, whether it's the Middle East or whether what's going on in China and what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, have been years in the making. And I think, what I consider the bad guys are taking advantage of it. But you're right. I mean, listen, if I'm sitting in the White House and I say, okay, what do I do about Russia? I mean, Russia does have the nuclear alternative. But what's interesting, I don't know if you saw this, but, you have the European Union and Macron, the president of France, now talking about if America backs out, that maybe the French will put boots on the ground in Ukraine. I mean, do you think that's a mistake?
They're not going to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. They just talk. They're not going to do it. Nobody's going to risk World War III. Everybody is saying what they have to say to get some news. Macron wants to be the leader of Europe. He's not going to put boots on the ground. Nobody's going to get into a nuclear war. Ukraine is going to be a casualty. I know you lived in Ukraine. You have an emotional connection to Ukraine. But I don't think anybody is crazy enough to get into a fight with Russia in Ukraine for an unwinnable fight. If you want to win the fight, use the bomb, kill 100 million people, you will win the fight, and you will have territory that's desolate with nothing you can do with it. However, it's a choice you have to make. Use the bomb and wipe out everybody, or stay the way you are and cut your losses. I'm being practical. You know, we can go around having this fight for the next 10 years. It's not like the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Times have changed. It's dangerous time. Okay.
No, listen, I agree. You are practical. You are practical. But the question is, let me ask this. So if, well, let's just go back to the core question about, how is it going to be resolved? I agree. Listen, there's no way anybody, even if you put boots on the ground, you're not going to kick Russia out of Ukraine. It's just not going to happen. Okay. So, I mean, and I talk to my Ukrainian friends and the Ukrainian government, and we have this debate every day. They live in some fantasy world thinking that there's a win, a victory. Now, and there's just not. Okay. So, and one thing I'll say, I mean, one thing Trump has been very good about, he talks about peace. There's a key difference. I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but there's a difference between peace and victory. I mean, he'll bring not sustainable, he'll bring peace, but peace is not victory necessarily, because victory for the Ukrainians would be kicking Russia out. But I do think Trump will bring peace. I think it's going to be forced upon the Ukrainians. The question is, what happens if Russia decides to go into Moldova next, or to go into Georgia next? Not your great state of Georgia in the south, but should the world then be outraged and do more to stop Russia, or do you think that they should just let them take more land?
No, you can't let them take more land, but that would be part of the peace deal we make. If they do, I don't know if these countries are part of NATO or not, so I can't comment. But if they're not part of NATO, and Russia sees them as a buffer between Russia and the West, then leave them that way. You don't need to expand NATO into the border with Russia. You don't need to provoke the tiger. I don't think it's right. So let it be, and let's move on with life. What is the point? First of all, Russia didn't invade any country. Russia didn't attack anybody prior to this. So, well, I don't know if I'm right in saying that, but if you don't provoke them and they attack, then you have a justification to fight. But if you provoke them and then Russia fights back, then who's at fault? Russia for fighting back, or you for provoking them? I think we can all live in peace. I don't think, look, if this war ends now, you can save 1 million lives. What is that? Isn't that more important for Ukraine to save 1 million lives than worry about territory that they cannot hold, a war that's unwinnable? Now, we're not going to encourage Russia to attack Moldova and the other countries. That is not right. We've got to have some kind of a treaty in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, hopefully, if a treaty is made between the West and Russia, Russia will honor the deal as long as it is not violated from the West. I think the West should be careful not to violate a deal with a country that is not as powerful economically with the West or the United States of America, but militarily is a dangerous country.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. If China attacks Taiwan, should America intervene?
If China attacks Taiwan, if America intervenes, to what end? They could intervene, but if China has the force of 1 million people, I've been to Taiwan and I've been to China, and they attack Taiwan, that would be a catastrophe. America could intervene, but how could America win a war 10,000 miles away from home? It's not a war they can win. So why get into a fight you can't win? So why don't we do something different? Why don't we make sure we don't provoke China to attack Taiwan so we can have the status quo?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's a matter of, excuse me, it's a matter of not necessarily provoking Taiwan. I mean, listen, I agree. This is where I struggle, to be honest with you, is that the practical and the theoretical. I mean, when you have, what Russia's doing and what China's probably going to do to Taiwan, and you look at other like Venezuela against Guyana, I mean, it's a tough world, because practically speaking, you're right. Just accept your losses. Let's stabilize the world. Let's have peace. And so what if some authoritarians take certain parts of the world? So be it. At least the world is prosperous. The world has stability and peace. So what's the trade-off? Now, I think that we're in a period of time. It's like the stock market. Sometimes you have to have a correction, before everything stabilizes. So maybe what we have to do now is that we just have to have a correction where what happens in Ukraine is stabilized, what happens in China is stabilized. And then, so as I said, maybe the bad guys win a little bit, but at least the world is stable. But the question is it sustainable? I mean, we look back at World War I and World War II, as you were talking about. I mean, that whole level of what appeasement we talk about, that's what eventually led to World War II, where we appeased Hitler and we just let him be. And then eventually he wanted more and more and more. So do you think that if we appease everybody and we stabilize things, that it's sustainable? Or do you think that eventually there's going to be global conflict?
You got to pick your fights. You were in Vietnam for 20 years. The French were there, you were there, 50,000 Americans were killed, 500,000 lost their lives, and you left 500,000 babies behind. You fought for 20 years, spent billions of dollars, and pulled out. You were in Afghanistan. You were there for 10, 15 years. You pulled out there too. Now, you got to pick your fights. You really have to pick your fights. I do not support appeasement. Appeasing Hitler was not the right thing to do. You had to fight, and Churchill was right. Second World War and Roosevelt and all those guys, and and so was Japan. Those battles had to take place, and you had to win. But here is the big but: with nuclear weapons, what option do you have? If it was that simple, why isn't South Korea attacking North Korea? Why isn't America attacking North Korea? They have the bomb. It's mutual annihilation. Everybody dies. With the bomb, it has changed the face of warfare. The bomb changes everything. If you attack a country with the bomb and they have nothing to lose and they drop the bomb, everybody dies. And let's talk about justice for a minute. Clinton, who is considered the first black president, the Rwanda crisis took place. 1 million people were massacred in Rwanda. America did not send troops to help anybody. The French did not send troops. 1 million people died. It took Paul Kagame and Ugandan folks to invade and stop the bloodshed. So if we're talking about justice in the world, then you must play the game by the same set of rules. And if you're going to play the game by some set of rules, you can't selectively talk about democracy and justice in some country and ignore the deaths of African people. This is where I struggle, just like you struggle with what we're talking about. I struggle with justice across the world. 1 million people died in Rwanda. No help came through. In Ukraine, I don't know if they've lost 1 million people, but that is an unwinnable war. So we need to pick our battles. In Africa, you have the Chinese dominating Africa economically. Well, prior to that, we had the Europeans taking away millions and millions of people of African descent to America and to the Caribbean, to Brazil as slaves. When they did that, they didn't ask us if we had a passport. They didn't ask us if we had a visa. They just put us on a boat, put a chain around our necks, took us there, built the economy, and then turn around and say, let us pray. So if we're talking about justice, let's talk about justice across the world. That is my position.
Now, listen, it's a very fair point. It's a very strong point, and it's a very, very emotional point. But let's continue talking about Africa from the standpoint. I mean, you look at the fact in West Africa, you've had so many coups. You see what's happening in all these countries. Should African nations like Nigeria and others have taken more active role to protect their regional partners when these coups are taking place? Because these coups, these military dictators aren't exactly the nicest people in the world. So should more action be taken by African nations to protect what's happening in the continent itself?
If you plan a coup because you want independence from the French, I support that. We got to rule ourselves. We got to be our own leaders. We're not going to be slaves to the French or anybody else. So if a coup took place in a country so you can cut your ties from the French because they dominated your economy and don't allow you to breathe, then I support the coup. But at the same time, I think Africa must come together as a continent because we could be a superpower on our own right. We have to control the media. We have to have the capabilities to make. We need to have an arms industry so we can be independent from the West, and that's very, very important. We need an arms industry. Nigeria needs to make its own weapons. Ghana needs to make its own weapons.
Well, why no, listen, we have to go here in a second. I'm getting the plug, the pull here. Okay, so Ben, let me just ask you this one quick question before we go. What is your prediction about totally off the wall. What is your prediction about the Ghanaian presidential election? Do you think that that's going to be a game changer? Do you think the incumbency is going to continue, or do you think there's going to be a change there?
Well, first of all, in Ghana, every 8 years they flip. They flip. You know, I like Ghana. I like Ghanaian politics. They flip. The different parties win every 8 years. You know, Ghana has a stable economy, and they have good people there, and they have good leadership. So really, it doesn't matter who wins. I don't think it makes a difference which party wins in Ghana. Whoever wins in Ghana will be business as usual. There are good people there. There's not be no radical economic or political change.
Well, listen, I love chatting with you always. It's always a pleasure to see you. I wish we could talk more. The show's never long enough. But listen, thanks for being on the show, Ben. It's always an honor. Good luck with your speech. And thanks everyone for joining Around the World with Dane Waters. This is Dane Waters signing off, and we will talk again next week. Thank you very much.